It's a new Fantom for a new year. So the big news, well, for me this week, is that Roland have launched a new workstation. But it's not new. We already have it. It's called the Fantom. But we already have the Fantom. It was launched 2 years ago. There was a big thing at Abbey Road and people like Keybed went there. But this Fantom is called the O, which is Fantom written Fantom-O, not Fantom-0, by the way. And I guess you might call it Fantom not O, little brother. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. But before we get onto the Fantom-O, there were a bunch of posts this week from Behringer, basically at the latter end of the week on Facebook, saying that the UBA desktop was alive and fully working. I think we should have some Jeff Lynne's "I'm alive." Dun dun da 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 da. All right, you get the drift. My dilemma still exists. I want an Oberheim OBXA. I'm going to get a Behringer UBXA, but do I get the keyed version or do I get the desktop version? Dilemma, dilemma, dilemma. I suppose we have to start with some obvious things. First of all, price. This new workstation comes in 3 flavours, the 06, the 07 and the 08, for 61, 76 and 88 keys respectively, retailing at in the UK 1270, 1500 and 1690. That's all rounded up. It's not quite those numbers, but they're all rounded up. So the first thing that really jumps out about this new Fantom-O is the massive price differential between the original Fantom, which are still retailing for £2,700, £2,950 and £3,200 respectively for the 61, 76 and 88 keyed versions. So there's a massive price difference between this Fantom-O and the original Fantom. And you've got to ask yourself, what am I not getting for half the price? Or maybe the correct question is, what do I not need in my Fantom that justifies buying the O? I should also point out at this point that the prices I've just quoted were on the Thomann website this morning, which is the 20th of March 2022. Apart from price, the next major difference you're going to notice is keyboard weight. You don't now need to employ 3 roadies to move your Fantom 88 around. Or your Fantom 8 around, should I say. When the Fantom arrived on the scene, many reviewers made real comments about the fact that this workstation they considered bulletproof. The build quality was considered really high, the keyboard had an all-metal frame around it, and generally it felt like a proper, well-built machine. The other thing you notice about the dip between the O and the original Fantom is the O requires an external power supply, whereas the original Fantom had all the transformer guts and gubbins inside the keyboard itself. Now that does add a little bit of weight, but not a lot. The original Fantoms were respectively for the 6, 7 and 8, 20, 23 and 35 kilos. The Fantom-Os are 10, 11 and 20 kilos. That is considerably lighter. As you can see, you just don't need these roadies anymore for moving your Fantom around. Now, some of the weight saving, as I said, will be as a result of an external power supply. But that's only accounting for, let's be generous, 2 kilos. there is no general MIDI on the Fantom-O. There's no actual MIDI sockets on the back. Maybe Roland's trying to signal that this is the end of general MIDI. However, I have to be honest and say I do not think so. But you will save a little bit of weight on the circuitry that runs those things. Dimensionally, the O is slightly smaller, not by a lot though. So, you know, if you're going to think you're going to save space, you're still limited by the fact you've got 61, 76 and 88 keys. So you don't save an awful lot of space. But I suspect that the bulk of the savings in terms of weight are going to be related to the fact that this new O keyboard looks much more plastic orientated in terms of how it's constructed, whereas the original Fantom that was out 2 years ago, or still on the market, was constructed of far more robust materials. And the other thing is around the keybed itself. Now I know the keybed is different, so of course that will make, or that will give you a saving in weight. Overall, what does this mean? It makes the O much more portable. And for those that have been complaining about the weight of these keyboards, this makes it a very proper, what's the word I'm looking for? It makes it a viable proposition for the gigging musician that is travelling by himself, or herself, should I say. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the O has not got any conventional MIDI ports. So if you look at the back of it, you won't see an in, out and through like you will see on most other instruments still today. That means that you're going to have to drive your MIDI conversations through a computer, because it does have USB sockets, USB and USB-C and USB-A types, sorry, USB-B type sockets on the back of it. So the question is, how do you drive other devices if you haven't got a computer? Well, maybe you have to load a bunch of stuff into the sequencer. Maybe that's where Roland are going. Maybe Roland are signaling the end of MIDI as we know it, now that the MIDI 2.0 standard has been ratified. The problem with this kind of decision is it makes it very difficult for you to use this keyboard without a computer to drive other computers in your rig. Or sorry, other keyboards in your rig, not computers. Although you could have computers in your rig as well. At the end of the day, that at the end is a computer, even though it is a mega synthesizer. So, if you don't have MIDI, you can't use general MIDI clock. You can't send clocks out to other instruments. It makes it very difficult in that situation. But Roland have obviously done this for a reason. It's probably cost cutting, it's probably weight saving, but there is no general MIDI on the O. Like the Korg Nautilus, Roland have removed Aftertouch for this cheaper keyboard. This also refers back to my theory. In fact, I actually know that the keybeds have been changed on the O series to save weight. They're not as bulletproof as they are on the Big Brother, if you like, and therefore you've lost Aftertouch. Is that important? Many people think it is. Many people don't care. But at the end of the day, we'll see how that fares. It's one of the big criticisms of Nautilus is the loss of Aftertouch. Now we come on to user interface and screen. The bottom line is the screen on the O is slightly smaller than the Big Brother. It's 5.5 inches across against 7 inches on the standard Fantom. I'm told there aren't as many buttons on the buttons, pots and faders on the O. Although I have to be honest and say at this point in time I haven't sat down and counted them all. But it still seems to be a fairly functional interface. The impression you get from going through the marketing and promotional videos that have been released by Roland is they're pushing you towards a computer interface. Where the keyboard is effectively becoming a surface for the computer program you're using. Marketing makes more than one reference to native, and I've used the word native, integration to Logic Pro, Mainstage and Ableton. It's interesting that one of the market leaders, Pro Tools, doesn't exist on this list. Interesting, that one. I'll be honest that I'm always skeptical about these native claims for having interfaces, because I always find it very difficult to get the workflow to work correctly between the musician, the surface and the computer. Definitely from my perspective, which is why I tend not to use keyboards as part of my workflow, because the buttons aren't dedicated to doing just one thing. They're kind of multifunction. If you want to do something on the keyboard, you have to be in a mode to change the button. If you want to do something on the computer, you have to be in a mode to make it work on screen. My opinion has always been that interfaces with things like Ableton and Logic Pro and Mainstage are driven by a set of requirements written by a bunch of software engineers, and not necessarily driven by a set of musicians trying to understand how to make their workflow work better. Okay, keyboard. And the reason I said before the keyboard has changed, because there is a statement that the 88 key unit will not be getting the 88 PH50 hammer action keyboard that the Fantom has. Instead, you're getting a PHA4 velocity sensitive keyboard. So there you have it. The Keybed is different, and I suspect the Keybed is different across the entire range. It's probably the PH4 across the entire range, but I've only looked at the hammer action one. Now I know that not having a hammer action keyboard and the frame that that keyboard goes in will have saved Roland a massive amount of weight. The issue here comes that in recent years all the manufacturers have tried to make their 88 key version of their keyboard, synth, controller, whatever it happens to be, hammer action, to give you that real weighted piano feel. Some might say that the loss of this hammer action is not a bad thing, because it now means that you can give a synth player who doesn't play hammer action keyboards all the time more of a synth style 88 key keyboard that they can use, and that's definitely where the O has gone here. Is the loss of an 88 key hammered keyboard an issue? Maybe, because it indicates that you don't get the V piano sound module. Put it this way, I couldn't see on the marketing and the description specification of the O. It's definitely there on the Fantom. They make a big thing about it on the Fantom, but you don't seem to get that engine on the O. Is that the only thing you've lost? I don't know, because I haven't gone through it on a line by line basis, but that was the one thing that really stood out for me. No hammer action keyboard, no V piano engine. The next thing that jumped out when I was comparing like for like was you don't get the stereo analog filter features that you get on the Big Brother with the O. Is that because Roland have looked at how people are using that particular function and deemed that they're not using it at all? Or is this another one of the weight saving, cost cutting exercise to get it down to a price point? This was another one of those ones that caught my eye, around USB audio interfaces. And I'm not sure whether this is going to be a problem going forward, but I've had issues around this particular area with other keyboards. The issue is that the original Fantom samples at 48 kilohertz. And I find that with other pieces of equipment, 48 kilohertz tends to cause the least problem. Now I know there's an argument that says you should always record at the highest rate you can, or you should always sample at the highest rate you can, which is 98 kilohertz. And the Fantom-O quotes 24-bit 98 kilohertz operating standard against the original Fantom, which was 24-bit 48 kilohertz. Now I'm not sure whether on the O you can down it to the 48 kilohertz. It makes no reference in the stuff I've seen so far. And I get the argument about higher is better, but sometimes running the whole rig at 48 kilohertz actually causes less problem than trying to run the rig at 98 kilohertz. Also saves a lot of disk space if you're trying to do any sort of sampling or recording. In the marketing literature for the O, they make reference to there's not as many sockets on the back of the machine, and there aren't. And one of the noticeable absences on the back of the machine is the fact there's no CV or gating sockets now. They seem to have been removed. And I guess if you're operating in a fully digital world, then the argument is you don't need them. But many are pulling the old analog synths and instruments out of the attic to get back to that real analog feel. And many of these instruments require CV or gate functions to trigger notes or keep time. And therefore, without these on the Fantom-O, should I say, you will need to go and buy other equipment. Possibly there's an ARIA piece that does it, or from other manufacturers, that allows you to actually trigger CV and gate functions. So that's another piece you need to buy, but you are getting the O. That's considerably a lot cheaper. Now, by all means, I did not expect this list to be definitive. The differences between the two instruments were the main things that caught my eye when I was effectively doing a thumb down on the specification between the two machines. While you appear to lose a few areas of functionality on the O, that makes the Fantom but it does make the Fantom-O a serious contender now in the £1,500 keyboard space. Given that a musician, many gigging musicians I should say, have issues over weight, and this has been a serious issue when lugging a Kronos or a Fantom or a Montage around. A lot of musicians have been tempted into the Yamaha space because they offer a machine that has most of the functionality of their flagship machine, but considerably less in weight. It allows the gigging musician to move it around. Does this new Fantom-O mean that musicians who would have gone to the Yamaha product have been umming and ahhing about whether Nautilus is worth it or not, now start to look at the Fantom-O as the keyboard to buy for their gigging portability issues? I mean, the bottom line is you could have a Fantom and a Fantom-O, use the Fantom in your studio and the O on the road. It was all very, very interesting. This mid-ground £1,500 workstation synthesizer space has just got a lot more interesting. And on that note, because I'm going to spend the afternoon playing with this, I should say, live long and prosper, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.